Hey everyone, welcome to Cloud Masters. I'm your host, Matan Borda, and I'm joined with my co-host, Sam Clark, a former AWS TAM. And today we're going to cover all things CloudFront, and we're joined by Avi Keinan, who isn't just any AWS expert, but an official AWS Hero. And for those unfamiliar, AWS Heroes are like technical leaders in the AWS community, and they're hand-selected by Amazon. So when I say Avi really knows his stuff about AWS, I'm not exaggerating. And as part of his job, he helps AWS customers optimize their CDNs, their usage, monitoring, cost, things like that. And so he's a perfect person here to talk about CloudFront. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you.
Why don't we just kick things off? Who should be using CloudFront? Like, what's the technical benefit, use cases? Maybe give an overview of CloudFront there for those uninitiated.
Theoretically, if you serve customers, end users that connect to your website, application, game, whatever it is, from their laptop, computer, phone, doesn't matter. Most likely, if you use CloudFront, it will optimize your performance, and it should not cost extra or more than it should not explode your cloud bill if you do that.
So anyone who's serving content should be using.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so games, if you're serving images, even whole host of use cases there.
Yeah, even if it's usually when you talk about, CloudFront is a CDN, it's a content delivery network, and usually people tends to think that it's only for static content, but it's not always for static content. You can also optimize your dynamic content. So let's say I have a load balancer and I serve customers worldwide. If I use CloudFront, if I put CloudFront in front of my load balancer, my loading time will be better. If I'm not compressing the content on the fly, CloudFront will do that for me. So, especially because the way of how CloudFront works, it will optimize my loading time, and basically it will make my website go faster.
And what origins does CloudFront work with? Because S3 comes to mind, but I imagine it's more than just S3.
Basically, you can put any endpoint. You can even put Google Cloud in front as the origin of CloudFront. There's not a lot of logic by doing that, but basically you can set any origin that you want as long as it's connected to the internet.
Have you encountered any situations where like a customer is using a different CDN when like a third-party CDN when CloudFront would have been like a better fit? How does it compare?
So if you know companies like Apple, for example, or Microsoft, every time they launch a new version, they basically, because it's so complicated to push so much data globally, they use all the CDNs that are available. And they split the traffic. They are doing like 5% every time because it's impossible to push so much data. So it's common that many companies, they have multiple CDNs, not only one, mainly because, first of all, redundancy. And second, you might have better performance in one CDN, but you have better pricing in another CDN. So you want to mix between the contracts that you maintain to get the most out of both of the companies. And we can take as an example, let's say I have Akamai that serve worldwide. And in China, because it's an issue to serve content in China, you have to have license and other stuff for that. You can use CloudFront in China or China Cache or other providers that you have. So usually you want to take the best out of each of the services to get the most for the service, to get the most for your content, basically.
I've actually also had the situation, and I think Amazon's terms prevent it, but we got a special allowance for a customer many moons ago that was daisy chaining them. So they actually had CloudFront set up to be their main CDN, getting the data from the origin, which was S3 and EC2, and then they had Akamai pointing at CloudFront as an origin. So the customer could actually use essentially two CDNs daisy chained to each other. And in the case that one failed, then the other one was able to pick up the load. AWS doesn't like it, and I think they do actually try to block it. But in this case, the customer was allowed to do it.
It's not a good practice today to put a CDN in front of another CDN. And sometimes even customers by mistake they chain CloudFronts one to another, and then they have this weird error and they can't understand why. So don't chain CloudFront's distributions. It's not going to work.
Is your tip like of using multiple CDNs and combining and stuff like that, is that relevant for maybe 100-person, 200-person company, or a company spending $20K, $30K a month, or is one just fine with them? Like, because you use Microsoft as an example. I don't think we work with too many Microsoft-sized companies.
Yeah, yeah. I think it depends on how much you spend on data transfer for content. If your traffic is like 10 terabytes per month, it's a headache. Don't do it. You're not going to get anything, any value out of it. But if you are getting into somewhere between 150 to 500 terabytes, most likely it will be a good idea to split the traffic between them. Also, it's supposed not to be a single point of failure, but it's another service that can be a single point of failure. It's a rare event that the CDN it goes down entirely. Usually your origin is down, and then you usually see either it's in Capsula CDN or Cloudflare CDN that shows you this nice graph that the cloud is okay, and then they have this arrow pointing to your origin with X on it, saying that it's not functioning. So your origin is down basically.
That's the whole idea of a CDN, isn't it? If it does fail, it's going to fail seamlessly so that it's going to fall back to the origin, right? Everything's just going to be redirected. It might be a little bit slower because you're not close to the user anymore, but it should essentially operate in the same way as if it was fetching data from origin on a cache failure, right? So when it doesn't hit something. So when they fail badly, that's when you really know, because it's not just your website that goes down. It's a lot of customers.
I would say how much it's going to cost you to have 1 hour of downtime. Is it 500 euros? Is it 5,000 euros? Is it $1 million? I think that if it's like 5 digits and more, you might want to consider another service just in case. If not, it's going to be a headache.
When do we go to the Netflix model and start building our own CDN and putting nodes in every ISP around the world?
When my email will end with apple.com.
When we get to Netflix size, yeah.
Yeah.
One last question about like cloud, in terms of CloudFront being a fit. Like, let's say, what if you're just using AWS? Are there some benefits if you're an AWS shop exclusively to using CloudFront versus other CDNs, like cost-wise? I think we mentioned something about data transfer in a previous episode, but I don't remember.
Yeah. So let me show the graphics here. So let's say you serve content, whether it's dynamic content or static content, and this is the user, and this user wants to watch a video in his phone. It can use any CDN basically. It can use Amazon CloudFront, or it can use any of the other third-party CDN that there are in the market. It could be Akamai, Cloudflare, Fastly, Incapsula, and so on. There are many CDN companies. The thing is, when you serve content from S3, there is a charge for data transfer out. Data transfer out to the internet, it starts at $90 per month, and if you're a big spender, it goes down to $50 per terabyte. So this is the spend when you send content out to your CDN. But if you send traffic from S3 to CloudFront, basically this path is free. So you are paying only for the path from CloudFront to the end user. And sometimes it could be because of configuration error, or it could be because that's the way the CDN works. If you work with other provider, you might pay the same amount to deliver the content to the end user, but to pull the content from S3, you will pay a lot of money because you basically pull a large amount of data from S3. And I can give Fastly as a good example that Fastly, they have this, I'm not sure about the exact technical term, but they have like something similar to Origin Shield. Basically, they ask the file one time from the origin, and then they spread it globally to all the POPs. This is how fast it works. It's not the same situation with all the CDN providers. So a major benefit to use CloudFront is that you save the data transfer out in this case. And we saw many times that customer spends X on CDN, third-party CDN, and they spend the same amount on transferring the data from their origin, from S3 to that CDN. So if you're looking for major benefit to use CloudFront, it's cheaper basically.
So cheaper from a data transfer perspective. So
Yeah.
in which case, if you're doing a multi-CDN strategy, then the data transfer costs are also something that you need to play around with and factor into your estimates as well.
Yeah, but usually when you get to the point that you have like 2 or 3 CDNs, you make sure that everything is optimized and everything is the same as all the it doesn't matter to which endpoint you reach, to which CDN you will reach, you will always get the same response. You won't get anything similar. For example, if you have a wrong HTTP header in a JavaScript file, it might you might see a white page in your website. So you want to make sure that everything is aligned and show the same headers, and there are no differences between the CDNs.
Is this something? How often do you find? Are you working with a customer on multiple CDNs on like? You said you should make sure you're optimized before and whatnot.
So we basically support AWS, Google, and Microsoft customers. It's rare to see a customer that use Google CDN and and CloudFront Amazon CDN at the same time. What we usually see is customers using Cloudflare to protect their dynamic content, to protect their website list, and then they use other CDNs for the static content. We try to help them to get the most out of both of the solutions. And we need to remember, we usually work with cloud native startups. Startups are not big spenders, are not big data consuming, unless they are in the ad tech industry. So we would see something around somewhere between 50 to 150 terabytes per month. That's the average, I think.
That's your definition of like a heavy spender on a CDN.
I think 100
50.
100 and above is a heavy spender. It's not like a huge ad tech company that spends like 10 petabytes per month, but it's a great start point.
Well, on the topic of heavy spenders, let's talk about how they can optimize costs on CloudFront. And the first thing that comes to mind is I forget what it's called, but I think it's like the savings plan equivalent for CloudFront, like something with a bundle. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's called CloudFront's security savings bundle, basically. Yeah, this is how it's called, and it's quite similar to savings plan. You commit to spend, and you get, I think it's 30% of your CloudFront data transfer out pricing, like that 30% discount of the list price of CloudFront.
Is it you commit to a spend or you commit to a certain number, like a traffic commitment?
I'm pretty sure it's spend.
Okay.
We have our own offering for CloudFront, so we usually tell customers don't use the savings bundle. We can offer something that is much more competitive. So usually we will see customers coming with a savings bundle, and once they consume the entire year, then we tell them, listen, let's move to our offering.
And on the topic of that, I remember a couple of years ago, you wrote an article talking about average object size and how when you're looking at a bundle or when you're looking at any sort of commitment to CloudFront, whether it's with us or direct, that this is an important kind of thing to measure and understand before making that commitment.
Yeah. So the way CDN works, basically, you have the data transfer. So you need to have like large providers, you need to be connected, and many servers, and the backbone should be large enough to accumulate the entire traffic. But what about the compute of the CDN? When you generate so many requests, it requires a lot of compute on the other end. So Amazon decided that they will count the average object size, which is the number of traffic you had in kilobytes. Um, it doesn't really matter. You just divide it to kilobytes. The traffic you have divided by the number of requests that you had at the organization level. So let's say I have 50 AWS accounts in the organization. They will count it across all the distributions together. Then you get a number. If you are a company like Netflix, it will be a really high number. If you are a company, if you're at a company and you deliver banners and you have like billions of requests per month, your average object size will be lower. And what AWS say from their end, the higher your AOS would be, it means that you will require less compute power from our side. So we will be able to provide you a better offering if your AOS would be higher. Basically, it translates to the number of requests that you have. So the lower the request you have, the better pricing you will get.
And so as part of this, as part of like to get this special pricing, whether it's through us or through normal bundle security, CloudFront security savings bundle, mouthful. They'll ask you to meet a minimum AOS in order to qualify for that.
They will ask you what is your AOS, and this point
Got
I
it.
want to share another. I want to show something from AWS website. We see AWS pricing for data transfer out, and at the bottom we say customer willing to make minimum traffic commits, yada yada, contact us. Every time you see this in some places in AWS website. You will also see that in data transfer. It means that if you reach to AWS and tell them, listen, I'm spending 100 terabyte per month. What can we do if I'm willing to commit to 1 year, to 2 years, to 5 years? I'm a big consumer of data transfer in Europe, have 5% in Asia. What can we do about it? They will offer you something. They will offer you, like, we can't get into the details because it's under, it's confidential, but they will offer you like something that is good. And part of the process to evaluate how good is the offer that they can give you, they will ask you, what is your AOS? What is your average object size? And it's so complicated to calculate that I wrote a blog post that shows how we do it in DoiT. We have our Cloud Navigator, which is I call it like Cost Explorer on steroids. It's much better than Cost Explorer. And we can see the average object size per account, per distribution, per day, per month. We have a great visibility on that. But then our competitors started asking me, how do you show it so easily? So I said, if they ask, if it's that complicated to our competitors, maybe we should write a blog post about it. So I shared a script in the blog post that basically use AWS Cost Explorer API to retrieve the number of requests from CloudFront and the data transfer, divide it, and show you the AOS per month. So if you want to sign a contract with AWS, you should look to have the higher the AOS, the better pricing you will get from Amazon, basically.
Good to know. And does anything happen if they don't? If like maybe your average object size gets less attractive after you already signed the commit? If it changes.
So things change. Let's say I have like I'm an IT company and I have 2 divisions that use CloudFront, and one of them decided to stop the project that they're doing or move to another provider or something like that. If let's say I committed to throwing a number to 200 kilobytes, and my AOS is 100 kilobytes, in the contract there will be a section that explains what happened with in cases like that, and we know how to calculate that and show it to the customer. And I would also say we used to get an invoice for December. Let's say I will get the invoice for December. I pay it, and that's it. There are special cases where you reach to miscommit, where AWS will add another bill. They call it OCB, out of cycle billing, on the following month. So let's say I miss my commit in December, I will see, let's call it a penalty, OCB penalty for CloudFront, in January, then in the following month. And we share the feedback from customers that they don't like it, that, when you pay for December, you don't want to hear about December anymore. You already paid for that. And this is how it works for now. There's nothing we can do about it.
But it is a commitment. You've committed to paying a specific amount. You haven't reached that, so they're sending essentially a true up invoice, right? So I mean, it's part of the commitment and part of the reason that I spend a lot of my time talking to customers about commitments and not just specific to services, but overall with the cloud providers. And if you're not happy, if you're worried about the commitment numbers, then maybe a commitment is not that. Maybe it's not the right time for a commitment. Maybe it's time to look elsewhere. If you know there's big changes coming, or if you're worried that application B, as you mentioned, Avi, might not be using CloudFront in the future, or might be shutting down, or something like that, then maybe it's not a good idea to consider them for your commitment. The AOS, the average object size is a really interesting part. As you mentioned, it relates back to the requests piece in particular. You bigger object size means less requests to serve the amount of data. A lot of people, when they're using CloudFront, when they're considering their bills, only worry about that data transfer. In my experience, and it's the same with S3, you quite often see requests being the highest part of the bill. Have you come across any good ways to help customers to optimize those and get rid of that requests being the killer at the end of the month?
If you have a website, use CSS Sprites. I don't know if people familiar with that. Basically, it means you aggregate all the icons to one photo or one file, and then you download the file and you specify for each icon that you want to use, which part of the file you want to grab the icon from. You basically need to reduce the number of requests. If you can do that, there's a cost for that, just like you pay for your servers. It's not something that you can avoid, but there are ways to reduce your overall request by aggregating requests, by sometimes there are requests that it will be more efficient to send to your load balancer rather than sending to your cloud. But if you're paying too much for requests, maybe you should consult with us before going with commitment to AWS. And I always say, we work with startups. They are not a steel factory with contracts for the next 5 years. It's really hard to predict how your day will look tomorrow. So planning for the next year is like mission impossible. So you don't need to commit to 100%. You don't need to commit to 150%. Sometimes you need to commit to 60 or 70%. And then you have this buffer that if something bad happens, you're still within the commitments and you're not paying too much.
It's always a trade-off, isn't it? You might be leaving a little bit of discount percentage on the table with the cloud provider, but at the same time, you're de-risking it for yourself, and that can make people, especially at the higher levels that are signing the checks and making those commitments, that can make them much happier.
Before we get off the commitment topic, besides, you said it was CS what?
CSS Sprites.
Sprites, like the drink?
With S in the end, yeah.
Okay. CSS Sprites.
I can Slack you that.
Yeah, please. And before we jump off of that, anything else, like when I think about when we help companies and their customers sign like commitments with AWS, not just to a specific service, we do cost optimization beforehand so that they know what they're committing to the right amount. And is there, besides that, CSS Sprites, is there anything else that you do with customers before they figure out, or you help them figure out what to commit to with CloudFront?
Resize your images. Though if you have if your banner is like 4,000 on 4,000 pixels and it weighs like 2 megabytes, and then the browser resizes it to something like that, you don't have to send the entire 4,000 pixels every time. You can resize that in advance to that, because you're paying twice. One time you pay for data transfer. The second time you pay for the time it takes the browser to resize it for the customer. So if you want to optimize your loading time, your website loading time, it's not that it won't like be a huge dramatic change, but it will be more efficient to resize your images in advance. If you edit, let's say you deliver videos and you have only one bitrate in your player, maybe you will pay a little bit more for storage. But if you add more bitrates to your player, you will save more money, because sometimes we all want to see 4K, but sometimes I'm in the train and when I want to see an episode and I can't watch 4K in the train. Maybe in 10 years from now we can, but right now we can't do that. So adding more bit rates will also improve the customer satisfaction and your cloud bill.
And speaking of customer satisfaction, we know that page loading time is crucial, is like a big part of user experience, but it's sometimes hard to prioritize because, how do you attribute increased revenue or increased savings from one thing or another to the reduction of page loading time with CloudFront? We kind of talked about it offline a couple of weeks ago, but
yeah, so it's like, how do you measure the revenue you got for one billboard? It's really hard to do that. But like 10 years ago, I read a few books about website optimization, and they said if the total load time of the website takes more than 2 seconds, you lost this customer. So you need to do the most to get to less to 2 seconds from the moment that someone clicked on Google link to your website until the user sees something in the website. So if I use CloudFront, the SSL handshake and the content is loading much faster. So I'm shrinking the loading time. That's great. If and usually the loading time is 20%, and the CSS and JavaScript is like 80%, the entire load. Sorry, downloading the content is like 20% out of the total loading time, and 80% is the things you do with CSS and JavaScript in your website. So what if you use lazy loading? Let's say I enter CNN or a news web or Facebook, and I see only the first part of the page, but the browser will download the entire part. And if there is like a counter that uses JavaScript at the bottom and no one sees it, it will make my website load slower. So there's a feature in JavaScript, it's called lazy loading, that basically it tells the browser only when customer is about to see something, only then load the content. And it saves you a lot of data transfer. And it also improved the experience for the user because the site loads much faster.
You kind of hinted earlier that, and I think it was the beginning of this podcast, but also like when we talked about this topic a couple of weeks ago, it sounded like many associate CloudFront with just for static content, and they don't know that they can also use it for dynamic content, or maybe not they don't know, but they don't use it as much or as well for dynamic content. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So years ago, CDN was used only to serve static content. And then Akamai, they had this feature. I think it's called ESI. I'm not sure about the name of this feature. Basically, you can break the website to blocks, and each block is you can cache each block, and then the CDN builds the page based on the blocks that they have in the cache. So let's say I go to the main page of CNN again as an example. The header is not going to change. The date changes once a day. The main article changes like every 20 minutes. So to each and different part of the website, I can set different time to live, TTL. This is how it's called. So the edge server, the CDN server, will pull the file only when the cache is about to expire. Since then, it became more and more popular to transfer your dynamic content, even if your load balancer generates the entire content through the CDN, and then you optimize the loading time, because how it works basically. Let's say I'm located in Israel. I want to reach out to US East 1. I have to travel through Europe, a very long route until I get to Virginia. But let's say Amazon had servers in Israel. So the next time I want to download an image, I will go to the server in Israel. I will ask for this file. Amazon will go to Virginia, and usually the CDN provider, it has like much better network performance to the origin. And the next time someone else will ask for that file, Amazon will deliver the file from Israel. So the performance and loading time would be much faster. And for dynamic content, because there is a faster route to the CDN, it's faster to serve files through CDN.
Is what you described, is that edge caching? So-
Yes,
Got
basically. This is how it works.
it. Speaking of kind of the differences between dynamic and static content, let's jump to security.
Mhm.
A couple weeks ago, you were telling me how it's security on CloudFront is pretty straightforward for static, but it's a little bit different it's a little more tricky. I think that was the word you used for dynamic content.
So first of all, we need to understand something. If someone wants to attack us and they're located globally, they can, for every server, they can basically flood us with requests. We need to, if we want to absorb the attack, we need to have a platform that can, excuse me, we need to have the platform that can absorb the requests and deny them. If we can't absorb the requests, our endpoint is down. This is basically how service denial DDoS attack works. So our load balancer, even though it's part of the cloud, it can't scale automatically to absorb the number of requests when someone attacks us. Because of that, we want to use a network of servers that can absorb that attack, and CDN is one of them. So what we can do, we can point our website to the CDN endpoint. And if we're being flooded, we can configure the CDN to pass only certain requests, to limit the number of requests per user. And there are many other tricks that you can do. This is the major benefit for dynamic content, because static content is usually, it can absorb a lot of requests. And even if it's down, it's usually down for like a minute or two. But when someone floods your servers, it's really hard to handle that. It's really like mission impossible. You try to catch the wind with your hands when you try to deny someone from DDoSing you.
And for those security cases, are you seeing most customers using something like a WAF combined with the web application firewall, combined with CloudFront to detect and then I guess mitigate against specific types of attacks?
Mm-hmm. Even if you can also disable distribution for some countries. So let's say I'm not selling in Ireland, and I would like to sell in Ireland, but just as an example, we love Ireland. Let's say I have zero business in Ireland. Unless my customers, they took a vacation and they are right now in Ireland, there is no point of me serving in Ireland. So if my main business in a certain country, I can enable only that country in the CDN. And by doing that, I reduce dramatically the chance that something will.
It's kind of like what you talked about, Sam, on like a older episode about restricting access to some regions, because I think it was a customer that didn't do that, and so someone got access to their AWS and they spun up a bunch of EC2 instances in some region they didn't know, they never used, and so they never noticed it.
Yeah, exactly. Not until the bill came through.
I had a call with a customer today, and I told them there are regions like Sao Paulo that you will never use. You can shut them down. Can technically it's called disabling the option to run something in that region.
Yeah, I had exactly that situation. Not from a security perspective, but I had a customer serving multimedia content, videos on demand here in Europe, and due to licensing reasons and so on, they could not provide that content outside of Europe. So with their CloudFront setup, they disabled all the other regions. North America, South America, APAC, everything was disabled, except for serving that stuff in Europe. Obviously, that's not enough. You do also have to have license controls in your programs, but yeah, CloudFront was able to help on that part, keep the cost down a bit.
Is there anything underutilized or not done enough, either security-wise or in general with CloudFront, like underutilized feature that you don't see as many customers take advantage of as they should?
If I'm not a global company, there is a price list in CloudFront. You can decide if you want to serve US and EU. That's the first level, and then there's another level to serve other continents, and there is the entire world. If I'm like a US company and I sell only to US customers, there's no reason that I will serve content in Asia. It will just cost me more. So even if I have like 2, 3, 4, 5 terabytes per month from these regions, I can simply disable these regions in CloudFront by changing the price list. Sorry, in the distribution.
My number one feature that's not used in CloudFront, again, me, FinOps, it's coming from the point of optimizing for cost, and that is internally people aren't using CloudFront, right? If they've got an app that's using serving a huge amount from S3, then there are ways to get that data from S3 or serve it out to the web much cheaper, and the best way to do that is CloudFront. People sort of think, well, I'm not serving this as part of a website, so therefore I shouldn't use a CDN. But in fact, if you're providing a PDF file to people around the world that they're downloading regularly, and if you're doing a lot of that, then CloudFront can actually make a huge difference.
Got it. Well, I think that's about it. Unless, Avi, you have any last words, anything that I didn't ask you that you kind of wanted to say here, CloudFront-wise?
If you pay a lot for CDN, if you pay a lot of penalties for AWS because you are not following the current commitments that you have, reach out to us and we will help you do that. We will help you optimize your costs.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. I think that's about it. Thanks for listening, everyone, and see you at the next episode. Thanks for joining us, Avi.
Thanks, Avi.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.